Take each game and its merits there.
Hello and welcome to our brand new podcast, Each Game on Its Merits.
So as you know, each week we're going through every single senior soccer international play by an FAI side, going all the way back to 1924. My name's Eibhilin O'Reardon.
And I'm Gary Cook, and today we are joined, as always, by our resident football expert, God King, Jerry Farrell.
Okay,
hello, everyone.
Good to have you again, Jerry.
2 hours.
Two hours, 2 L's, indeed. And no fodder on any of it. So we now have reached the dizzy heights of the quarter-final of the Olympics. So let's recap. How did we get to this point? So our first episode we spoke about a fundraising game between Ireland and Glasgow Celtic. The second game we spoke about in the last episode was a game between Ireland and Bulgaria, which we gloriously won 1-0, and so we've qualified for the quarter-final, which is an achievement to rival that of 1990.
Yes, in fact,
Jerry.
To better it, given that we actually won a match.
We got there without drawing 3 times, as you say, Gary, or 4 times, technically.
And probably played more attractive football.
Probably, possibly.
Right. Okay.
Although nobody can verify that because no living person was actually there. Anyway,
so we reached this quarter-final game against the Netherlands, and it's in the Olympics. And the attendance is about 1,500 people. There's a change on the Irish side, Jerry. Joe Kendrick, whose grandnephew also has a professional footballer, had a great career, various different clubs. But anyway, he gets injured in the first game, and therefore he's replaced by the interestingly named Frank Gent.
Yeah, that's right, Ian.
Of his own town.
Yeah, so Joe Kendrick, as you say, he's a guy playing for Brooklyn, who are not in New York or anything like that. Brooklyn was they played in around the Liberties, actually roughly up around Merchants Quay.
Okay.
But where they get their name from is there was a road called Brooklyn Avenue. It's no longer there, but it's kind of off the South Circular Road near where the John Player factory used to be. So that's where the club got their name. It's kind of an unusual one. It's an interesting one, but yeah, Joe Kendrick is injured in the first game. As we mentioned in the last episode, it's a very hot, dry period in May in Paris. They're playing on a very hard pitch.
We're into June now, so probably even hotter. Yeah, 2nd of June. Yeah, sorry. Yeah.
So the pitch against Bulgaria is very hard, very dry, prone for injuries, and obviously it's a very competitive game at the time as well. There's been a shower of rain in the interval, so this pitch is a little bit better football. And one thing I should mention, you mentioned the attendances there, and they are incredibly low. In fact, they're the worst attended games in the entire tournament. So the Green Army is not there in attendance. There's no travelling fans really.
There's no Davy Keogh says hello.
Davy Keogh, no, putting years on Davy there. But one of the other things that FIFA do, because FIFA are the guys organising the tournament on behalf of the Olympics, is they're scheduling kick-off times of the matches together. So there's other more appealing games kicking off in Paris at the same time that are drawing kind of 8,000-10,000 fans when we're only getting 1,500 or 2,000. And we kind of actually we'll come to it later that there's bigger crowds later on, but that's a big challenge for Ireland. That's why there's so few people in the stadiums, because there's other bigger, more glamorous ties taking place at the exact same time in the same city.
Even though it's a quarter-final.
Now, I did say there was no kind of travelling support, but obviously there's the players on the bench and some of the other squad members. There was a provisional squad of 22 picked. Only 16 are registered, but some of the other 22 do travel. So one of the guys who played in some of the practice matches, who was Bo's captain in 1924, Billy Otto, travels. He is actually from South Africa. He's born on Robben Island, which at the time was a leper colony. It wasn't a prison where, most famously Nelson Mandela was imprisoned. So he travels to support the team, as does another guy called Ernie Crawford. Now, Ernie Crawford is a famous sportsman in that he was Ireland's rugby full-back and was considered one of the greatest rugby full-backs of all time. But he was a decent soccer player as well. He played for Cliftonville. He played for Bohemians. One of the reasons that maybe he wasn't picked was because he was born in Belfast and they didn't want to maybe create a bit of grievance with the IFA. But Crawford, among many things, he's an ex-soldier. He's fought in the First World War. He's been injured in the trenches. He was a rugby fullback who played with a bullet in his wrist. But he brings his own handgun to the World Cup, which caused a bit of issue at the customs desk, and asked why he has it, and he just said, for my peace of mind. Because, who goes anywhere without their He was an interesting guy. He used to race trams down O'Connell Street. Something I don't think you'd see Johnny Sexton doing these days. But he was an interesting character.
I should say.
But he's there to support the lads.
Right, so it's the 2nd of June, it's 1924, and Ireland go down to a 1-0. They go down 1-0 after 7 minutes, and then an equalising goal comes in the 33rd minute from this Frank Gent character. But apparently, reports suggest that even though he scored, he didn't have much of a great game.
Yeah, in the aftermath, the post-match analysis, which you'd be very familiar with, Gary, of course. They're fairly ruthless on Gent. They're saying, well, he scored, but he didn't do much else, and it's kind of a surprise he's picked, because on the bench you have guys like Charlie Dowdall, who is considered one of the best players in the League of Ireland. You also have Christy Robinson, who's also a left footer who could probably take that place. So it's a bit of a surprise that Gent makes the team, and there's a bit of a view.
Are you suggesting that he's a cod?
I would never besmirch
this Frank Gent character is a cod, Gary.
What a wonderful crowbar he got in there, a cod.
Take it up for you,
He's a cod. I've never seen that guy, so I can't say whether he's.
But it's another. It's interesting enough. It's another Athlone player. So there's a stacks full of Athlone Town internationals. Okay, so it goes to extra time, and obviously the heat gets to the lads, and we can't hold out. I wonder what would actually have happened if it had finished level after extra time, because penalty shootouts weren't a thing back in the day.
They weren't, and I think it's only the 4th time in Olympic history that a match goes to extra time. It's very unusual, and sometimes there's replays, sometimes it's decided by a coin toss. If you look at what happens in the Olympics in the 20s and 30s, there's all sorts of different things. There's a famous story of I think in the 36 Olympics there's a row between the Austrian team and I'm going to say it's Peru, and they have a dispute over pitch invasions and things like that. A replay is ordered and Peru just basically say, stuff it, we're going home, we don't trust you guys to give us a fair game. Matches are decided by tossing a coin or drawing a lot this time if they can't separate the sides. So yeah, it's a very difficult one. The Dutch are a good side though, and look, our guest on the podcast will be able to talk more in depth about Dutch football history. But I mean, the Dutch football team have already won bronze twice at the Olympics.
Right.
They have a bit of pedigree. They've been winning their previous games comfortably. So much so that they feel emboldened to take off 2 of their goal scorers from the previous game and put on 2 debutants against Ireland. Now, of course, one of the lads, is the fellow who scores against us.
He scores twice.
He does.
I'm not good on his pronunciation. Is it Formanoy?
Formanoy, yes.
Yeah, okay. So we just going to sort of use this opportunity, because we are playing against the Netherlands, to talk about Jack Kirwan. We did have a question on Instagram from Stuart Allen, who asked us about the number of senior Irish soccer internationals who also played inter-county championship Gaelic football or hurling. And obviously people would remember Kevin Moran from the 70s. Con Martin would have played senior football for Dublin in the 40s and then was a senior soccer international. Back in this early period there would have been a few more. We've spoken about Val Harris already. There was Joe Lebridge, who also played for Dublin. Most of them are Dublin players. Lots of people who played minor, etc. But in terms of senior international and senior county football or hurling, Jack Kirwan is a fascinating character who wins an All-Ireland with Dublin in the 1890s. In that green space across in Talca Park, if anybody's familiar with it, Clonturk Park, used to be much bigger, but anyway, that's where they won the All-Irelands and played the All-Irelands in those early days. He switches from Gaelic football to soccer, plays for Everton, plays for Chelsea, plays for Spurs, wins an FA Cup for Spurs in 1901, and then becomes Ajax Amsterdam manager in the 1920s. I'm going to say. I think he finished up in 1920.
No, he's pre-war.
He's pre-war. Sorry,
yeah.
right? Okay,
so he actually kind of has to get out of Dodge in 1950.
Sorry, he's actually 1910 to 1950. Right? Yeah. Sorry. Yeah. But he actually would have signed one of the players who played against Ireland that day. A guy called Jan de Natras would have been signed, we believe, by Jack Kirwan. But that's a fascinating story of a former Gaelic footballer who then becomes a very quite renowned soccer figure, and also changed the nature of the Ajax jersey, which the Ajax Amsterdam Museum have given him credit for.
Yeah, absolutely. Because you got to remember, Ajax now are still one of the dominant force, probably the most significant club that people associate with the Netherlands. But when Jack takes over, they're a second division team. He's their first professional coach. He gets them promoted. Denatris, as you say, is a player he signs. He's the first Dutch international to play while at Ajax, so he's raising their profile. And Sparta Rotterdam are probably the bigger team at the time, and because their strip clashes so much with Ajax, he changes it, and he's the guy apparently responsible for the red stripe down the Ajax shirt and the layout and design of it. That was his innovation to stop them from clashing with shirts of Sparta Rotterdam, apparently.
But the tragedy of Jack Kieran is that he wasn't even from Dublin.
No, he was a Dublin. We mentioned JJ Keane previously, who won an All-Ireland with Dublin, even though he wasn't from Dublin himself, and neither was Kieran. He's from Dunlavin in County Wicklow.
That's very disappointing. Very disappointing.
A man, a County Wicklow man, is responsible for the elegant shirts of Ajax Amsterdam.
And just say, what was he doing during this period? He was in Italy coaching Livorno in the northern top flight. As no Serie A yet in Italy then, but he was coaching them in the top division that they were available to play in.
So what an incredible history that he has in terms of his Gaelic football prowess and his football prowess and the clubs he played for and the medals that he won. And he also played for Ireland on a number of occasions. Anyway, we go down to a devastating 2-1 loss in this game. The winning goal is scored in the 104th minute, and we are out.
It sounds like a bit of a Wim Kieft moment, doesn't it? From 1988.
Yes.
Nearly, but not quite.
No missed penalties or hitting the crossbar in this one. Offside goals. Are we kind of second best in this game?
Yeah, we're up against a team that have better quality, and the reports, as again we were saying, there's very little Irish media coverage there, but the reports back from the Irish in the Netherlands and the official reports from the Olympics are basically saying that the Dutch are probably the better footballing side. The lads go down fighting, they play gamely, they do their country proud, but they're probably beaten by the better team on the day.
Yeah, indeed, as we have frequently been, apart from do you remember the game in 1990 when after I think Ireland equalised and the last 20 minutes of the game was pretty much like it seemed like an agreement between both
tippy
teams.
tappy.
Yeah.
Well, the word had come in because Ireland had a draw would have been enough for both sides because Egypt had gone down 1-0 to England, and if that game had remained at that score, Ireland and Holland would both have gone through. Holland, as they were called at that time. I don't think necessarily we're encouraged to say the Netherlands these days, but anyway, we were quite happy to call them Holland in those days. But anyway, it was 1-1 draw, and both sides began to just keep the ball between themselves, and the game finished a 1-1 draw. And Ireland actually got second place in the group on the basis of lots. So we got our own back on the Dutch in a way. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, I suppose we did. No, I'm not actually saying that. What I'm saying is, we have never really mixed it with the Dutch generally, except when we beat them 2-1. Was it 1-0 with Jason McAteer's goal to qualify for the 2002 World Cup?
And we'll eventually get to top of that game in probably about 6 years' time after we've gone through the 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s and 60s. Can I just, who won this tournament? Uruguay won the tournament.
Yeah.
So we're out.
Uruguay win the tournament, and
right.
Uruguay are by far the most stylish team. And look, even in the Irish press reports, they talk about how Uruguay have revolutionised how people play football, how well organised they are, how skillful they are, that they combine great technical ability with physicality. They have a great player, one of the Luis Andrade, who you would say is probably the first black international football superstar, who is kind of a deep line creative midfielder for Uruguay, who is an absolute superstar footballer, becomes very popular with the ladies of Paris during his stay there. He really enjoys himself, as do the Uruguayan team, but they are really kind of revolutionising football. And if you look at it, like, people will say, oh well, Great Britain didn't compete in that tournament or in 28, and the 1930 World Cup, many European nations declined to send teams and things like that. But if you look at it, Uruguay win this, they win the next tournament, and they win the 1930 World Cup. They're certainly in with a shout of being one of the absolute dominant teams of their era, regardless of who they're playing.
So Uruguay, then, what you're suggesting, were the first South American team really to
hit the heights.
For it to really hit there, yeah.
On a global stage, yes.
So this game, though, I mean, Ireland effectively did not play another competitive game for over 10 years. because we're locked out of the home championships, which would have been a very prestigious competition at that time, and it's played every year, and people would have had an affinity towards that competition. We effectively do not play another competitive game until the 1934 qualification for the World Cup,
where we meet the Netherlands.
But I mean, that's 10 years of trying to get some kind of energy or enthusiasm amongst the Irish soccer public. It wouldn't be hard for that to have waned over that period of time, for that excitement of the home internationals as a distant memory, and this team is still trying to get some kind of legitimacy or trying to get some enthusiasm from the Irish soccer public or the Irish public at all, because again, it's a banned game, and the legitimacy of this side as a national side is still up for question in many people's eyes. So it's not a small problem for the FAI to have if they're big ticket games outside of the league or representative side, that they don't have any competitive games to play for 10 years.
Exactly. But what's important, and we'll see this in the coming episodes, is that the FAI send some blazers to this, but they do a good job in that what they do is they network and they make connections, and that the games that come from this immediately after this, and also in 26 and later on, are based on connections that are made at the Olympics. So the lads aren't just hanging around Paris enjoying themselves, they're making contact with other football associations. They're agreeing to matches in the future. It's a lot more difficult now because there isn't international windows. There's significant costs with bringing in a team from Belgium or Hungary or Italy or wherever it might be. So there's a lot of logistics involved. But the guys are busy trying to arrange these matches, trying to establish their credentials as a football association, but also arrange fixtures going forward and making sure that the Irish public see quality international teams coming to Dublin. And of course, this is the money spinner. There isn't sponsorship income. There's certainly no government income, because the government aren't really supportive in some ways of the association football team. Now,
they would have supported their affiliation to FIFA. They would have written a letter in support of that.
They do, but there's also issues around how soccer is taxed in the country and how certain senior civil servants view it, but they're not getting big significant sums, checks written out to them to fund tournaments or fund stadium improvements and things like that. So the main money spinner is gate receipts from big matches.
Yeah, and for which they have to go outside of these islands. So because the English, the Scottish, the Welsh, and certainly the IFA are not really going to facilitate them with internationals.
There'll be interleague games. They'll allow clubs to come over from England or Scotland and play in Dublin, but for the time being and for many years, they're not going to have international teams come to Dublin.
England are not going to come to Dublin.
No. But one thing we should say is that the Irish team do perform some what you might call diplomatic functions there. They lay a wreath at the tomb of the unknown warrior in Paris, in acknowledgement of this is only 5 years after the end of the war, 6 years after the end of the war, and they do.
Not an uncontroversial thing to do.
No, especially considering look, I mean, we were mentioning Charlie Dowdall there. We know his brother famously was in the IRA and pulled a gun at the first FAI Cup final against Bob to threaten Bob Fulham. There's guys with various different backgrounds and personalities in that squad. So
Christy Robinson, who we know would have been an IRA activist.
Yeah, he was basically he was on the Raid Monk's Bakery with Kevin Barry. He's a captain in the IRA. Charlie Harris was the trainer of the Dublin team on Bloody Sunday. He was in Croke Park when there was shooting happening. So there's a lot of nuance in that, but they are performing diplomatic functions. They're flying the Irish flag. And one thing we actually didn't mention in the talk of Bulgaria, the team, we joked about the lads wearing the blue jersey and things like that. They go out to Let Erin Remember.
So that's the anthem. That's
the anthem that's played, not the soldier song. And it's only kind of qualified later on. The government don't really want to make a commitment to the soldier song because they're kind of ambivalent about it. But the Minister of Defence basically quite tersely answers that the soldier song is the song of the Irish Army, and that's kind of taken as being the national anthem after the fact. But there's actually newspaper competitions to write a new national anthem. But there's a lot of discussion. Should it be A Nation Once Again, the Thomas Davis song? Should it be the soldier song? Should it be something like Let Erin Remember? Should it be a new composition? So there's a lot of this discussion taking place. So the idea of what Ireland is as a nation, who we are, what our symbols are,
it's still up for grabs.
Still up there.
Still up, and and surprisingly has unsurprisingly
100 years later.
Yeah.
Yeah. But that's interesting about the anthem. Those things are still to be determined. But the IFA had quite an insular view of the world. They didn't play a game against an international side outside of the UK until 1951. So it's interesting, the way the different sort of mentalities of the two associations. The IFA are quite happy to stay playing in Scotland and Wales for the first 70 years of their existence. The Free State Football Association are anxious to get big teams over here to play games, but they won't, as I say, play another competitive one for 10 years.
Yeah.
Okay, so we do have an interesting interview coming up though, Jerry.
Yeah, we have Jurryt van der Vooren, who is a Dutch football historian, who has a Feyenoord fan, I believe, who has a specific interest in this era of Dutch football, and we're going to have a quick chat with him about the Dutch team, who our opposition, our opponents. Who were they? What were they like? What was happening in Dutch football at the time? We've mentioned Jack Kerwin, but who else were the movers and shakers of the Dutch game?
So we're delighted to have on the podcast with us sports historian from the Netherlands, Jurryt van der Vooren. Jurryt, you're very welcome to the podcast. And we're here talking about the Dutch team that took on Ireland in the 1924 Olympics. And we were just talking kind of before we came on air there about the kind of Dutch footballing pedigree. Now, by the time they face Ireland, they've already beaten Romania quite handsomely in the opening game. But this wasn't the first kind of elite level football that the Dutch national team had played. They had a good pedigree in Olympic Games already, even before 1924.
Yeah, although it's different than the Olympics are now, of course, with over 200 countries participating, and then it's like before the Great War, it's maybe 10 countries participating in football Olympic tournaments. 1908 in London, it was the first time football was part of the Olympics, official. And the Netherlands, they ended on the third place. And I'm not saying winning a bronze medal, because there was no bronze medal for winning the third place. So there was nothing special going on in the Netherlands. They played in September 1908 some matches, and at the end they ended at the third place. 4 years later in Stockholm, then again they reached the third place, but then also including a bronze medal. And when they returned home to Amsterdam by train, of course, it's 1908, then thousands of people were waiting in Amsterdam to celebrate their medal. So it's the first time the Dutch national team was honored because of winning a medal, a prize. And that was after Stockholm. But also in Stockholm, it was such a small tournament, which is not comparable with any football tournament in our days. And after the Great War in 1920 and 1924, the Netherlands, 1920, it was in Belgium. And it ended very bad for the Netherlands because there was a big riot, a big fight between the players and the officials. Because after the Great War in the city of Antwerp, the conditions were very, very bad. It was just like London 1948. It was still a lot of damage because of the war. And so the Dutch football players, they had to stay on a boat, not in a hotel, but on a boat. And the officials, they had enough money for themselves to have good hotels. But the beds where the players had to sleep in, they were very, very bad. So there was a riot. They didn't want to play for the Netherlands anymore because they had no good place to sleep. And at the end, the Netherlands officially, they were, I thought, on the fourth place. But the whole team was, after the Olympics, they were sent away by the National League of the Netherlands because they had a fight between the officials. And 1924, it's the first time when the Dutch team in a more internationally football tournament, because also Uruguay was part of it, the United States was part of it, so it was becoming more and more global. And then there were some expectations from, okay, the Netherlands, maybe this time they will reach the final. So that was the beginning before the Paris Olympics started.
And maybe tell us a little bit about the makeup of that squad from 1924. Any prominent players, any players with a specific history or significance in Dutch football?
Most of the players they are only known by people like me who get paid by studying the history of Dutch sports, because they are completely forgotten. But some of them are still remembered, especially by the clubs where they played for. For example, Jan de Natris, playing for Ajax. He was a very important player in the first Ajax team ever to win a national title, 1918 national championship. And Jan de Natris, he was a brilliant player, but also very bad to handle. If he didn't agree, he didn't show up. He could walk away anytime. The last match in the year in which they won the national title, when they had to go by train from Amsterdam to Tilburg in the south of the Netherlands, he was the only player not in the train because he missed the train. So he also missed the match in which Ajax beat Willem II and was national champion. So he was a brilliant player, but also not very trustful. You never knew what he would do if he would show up. And all the teams participating in the national Dutch team of 1924, some of them we still know, like Ajax or Feyenoord, Sparta, Rotterdam, but SCH from the city of Haarlem, which was national champion of 1923, nobody knows anymore because they are not in the highest leagues anymore. Or other teams, Beekwik from Groningen in the north of the Netherlands. It was a mix of old-fashioned Dutch football like it was in the beginning, which was a high-class sport only for young people coming from the highest areas in environment. So their fathers, they were the presidents and the funders of society. There were no proletarian types inside the national team. And then after the Great War, then there was a big shift. It was a kind of a social revolution. Then you can see a club like Feyenoord or Go Ahead from Deventer, from the east of the Netherlands. They were not the upper class players. They were middle class or even lower, the labor people. And it was the first time in the national team at the Olympics, players were selected. In normal life, they would never have met the other players because the other players, they were the presidents of the factories. And the player from Feyenoord, Kees Spel, for example, he was the one who was working on that factory. And there were very big clashes because some of the old-fashioned players, they said, I don't want to play in the same team with people who are not of my class. And then Kees Spel said, it's okay, then I leave. So after the match against Romania, he left and he went to the train station, and then the other players were forced by the national union to apologize for what they said to him. He was only a labor man. And then he said, okay, then I will return. And in the next match, he scored 3 or 4 goals. And so it's the time of social change as well in society as in the national football team. And that makes it a very interesting mix of high-class football players, middle-class and lower-class football players, combining with old traditional clubs like Sparta and new clubs like Go Ahead and Feyenoord.
And one of the players who does well in the Ireland match, and I'm probably going to butcher his name, but his name is Vooren.
Yes.
He makes his debut against Ireland, and he's a Feyenoord player who's then moved to their city rival Sparta Rotterdam. And he makes his debut against Ireland. And one thing that struck me as interesting is that the Netherlands have this great win against Romania in the opening game. They win 6-0. And I think de Natris, who we mentioned earlier, scores a couple of goals in that. But then they change the team quite a bit. They take out 2 of the goal scorers and they bring in 2 debut players for their first match. Vooren is one. And he's the crucial player for the Netherlands. He scores early in the first half and he scores in extra time to give the win against Ireland. Do you know anything much about his career? Is he considered an early kind of club idol at either Feyenoord or Sparta, or is he kind of forgotten as well?
I think Vooren at that moment was playing for Sparta, not Feyenoord anymore, because the only Feyenoord player, he was Kees Spel, as I told you, the one who said, I'm going home because you don't like people from my class. What happened at exactly the same moment when the Olympics were played in Paris, also in the Netherlands, the last matches were played by the clubs for who will be the national champion. So at the day Kees Spel was playing in Paris, his own team Feyenoord became champion of the Netherlands for the first time in the Netherlands himself. So he didn't play in the match with his own team, and when they were winning for the first time the national championships. And that makes it very strange, because most of the players at that moment, I don't think they wanted to be at the Olympics. They wanted to play with their own team in the national competition, because it was the last matches were played before it was decided who would be the next champion. And I'm not exactly sure, but I was looking back in old magazines of 1924, and then it looked like the journalists were writing the first match against Romania after the players went back to the Netherlands, and then returned to come back to Paris with other players. But I'm not quite sure, because for me that is also new information, which always, I think I've seen everything about history, and every time when I look back to have a new research, then I will find new details like this, which I'm very curious now. Did the Dutch players go to Paris to play the first match against Romania, then went back to the Netherlands to wait who will play for the next match on the 2nd of June, which would be Ireland, and then returned to Paris, and then stayed in Paris, because the next match was against Uruguay, which was very fast after the match against Ireland. So then they would stay only a couple of days in Paris. So maybe there have been some changes because they went back to the Netherlands and returned to Paris.
Oh, that could explain it as well. Have you found much about the way the match was reported in the Dutch press? Was Irish football well known at all?
No.
Ireland was only a newly independent nation, really, at that stage. So.
Yeah. Only 2 days before the match against Ireland and the Netherlands, there was the Congress of the FIFA, where it was decided that Ireland would be a new member of the FIFA. So Ireland was only 1 or 2 days official member of FIFA when they played the match against the Netherlands. And the UK was also not a part of FIFA at that moment. And also on the same Congress was decided the home nations would return to the FIFA, because they left a couple of years before. The home nations haven't been a part of the FIFA for maybe 10 years. And then in 1924, they decided to come back. But on the same Congress as Ireland was allowed to be an independent member, not one of the home nations, but independent of the FIFA. And that makes it very interesting also for me. It must be the first match of Ireland as an official FIFA member. It was against the Netherlands. I realized only today, because I did my research for this.
Well, that's a very interesting one, because part of our podcast is a discussion of what we count as the first international game.
Yeah,
that's another very interesting conundrum. And did you see any reports about how the team's performance was described? Were they considered a good team, a bad team, a medium team?
No. I found one typical Dutch journalist article, which means was a lot of garbage and a little bit self-confident, a little bit too much. The Irish people, they don't know how to play football. They only just are a new member of FIFA. They are nice guys, but they don't know where the Netherlands are laying. They have never seen Dutch players. So there will be no problem at all if we will play against Ireland. Well, after the match, it was 1-1. So there was a problem because there was no winner at the end of the match. So there was
extra time?
Yes, extra time. There was an extra time, and only in extra time the Netherlands, they beat Ireland, which means the Dutch journalists, they were completely wrong. The Irish people, Irish football players, they really knew how to play a match. But that, I think, is how in the Netherlands they were looking at Irish football, because, of course, in 1924, 100 years ago, the world was completely different. It was a much smaller world. In the Netherlands, we didn't know what was going in other countries, just like I think in Ireland, it was hardly known what was happening around the world, because there was no television, there was just the beginning of radio. There was no internet, of course, and that's why you didn't know what was going on in the rest of the world. So if we knew anything about international football in the Netherlands, it was not we didn't know anything about Ireland. We didn't know anything at all. Only the countries which the Netherlands was playing a lot against, like England or Belgium. Every year there were 2 matches against Belgium or France, but nothing about what was going on, for example, in South America, because it was the first time when Uruguay was playing on the Olympics in 1924. I saw in Dutch magazines. Then the Dutch journalists, they realized, man, they are very, very good in Uruguay. That's the new football. It's the football of the future. But how could you know in 1924 what was going on in South America?
So just to finish off on that then, could you maybe talk a little bit about that? Because obviously we've mentioned prior to your interview that the great Uruguayan team, the team of Jose Andrade and Hector Scarcone and Jose Nasalzi, and some of these players are still around in 6 years later when Uruguay win the first World Cup. They are a revelation. Even in the Irish reporting, everyone talks about how impressive the Uruguayans are. Was it kind of an awakening moment in Dutch football when the Dutch football players and journalists and coaches see this style of play, and how were Uruguay viewed
it was
after that win?
Completely new style of football. And maybe a little bit the Dutch people who have ever been in Suriname, which is also in the south of America, which was a part of the Netherlands in that days, and they were visiting Suriname and then also visit maybe, for example, Brazil or Uruguay, just by accident have seen some football players from the south of America, but they had never been in Europe also, and European players had never been in South America. It was only in 1930 when the first World Cup was held in Uruguay. And Netherlands was not going because it was too far away. So there was the distance between South America and Europe, whether it was football or politics or cultural. It were completely separated worlds. They didn't know about each other. And the Olympics of 1924, in which I think Uruguay was going for the first time to be a part of the Olympics, then the football players, they were really impressive. Just like 4 years later, when they went to Amsterdam, also the Dutch audience, they really loved the Uruguayan football team, just like the hockey players from India, British India at that moment, which was also completely new for European hockey, what they were doing. So they completely changed international sports in hockey from Asia in 1928, and in football in 1924. It started in Paris, but it was coming from mainly Uruguay and Argentina.
Well, that's great. Aon, do you have any other questions you want to ask yours before we finish up? I've covered everything from my side of things, I think.
No, I just find it really interesting. I suppose in Ireland, there's a question mark over the validity of these internationals, because there's people who say that the Irish team first took the field in 1927 against Italy because the Olympics is kind of not seen as a legitimate international competition. But we're of the view that this was a FIFA sanctioned international competition, and that these are Ireland's first games. So we've spoken already about a friendly that we had against Glasgow Celtic to raise money. We've spoken about the game against Bulgaria that got us into the quarterfinal. Would your view be that these are proper senior internationals and should be regarded?
Well, it's funny because I always thought Ireland would have a completely different kind of view, because it's the first time ever they were allowed to participate in an international competition, not being a part of the United Kingdom. And if there is a reason to show your independence, you can show it on the pitch. And a couple of years ago, I had in Amsterdam, I do tours in the Olympic Stadium of 1928, and we had visitors coming from Ireland, and it was family of an athlete who was participating in 1928 in the name of Ireland in the Amsterdam Olympics. I forgot his name, but I know there was the first winner of Olympic gold ever of an independent Ireland. It was in 1928, hammer throwing, of course. Yeah. And I always thought that is for Ireland a very special moment, because for the first time in history, they were winning a gold medal in the Olympics as an independent country, and not as a part of the home nations, of as UK or whatever you say. And that's why I think it's really important for Ireland to realize 1924 is the first Olympics ever they participate as an independent country.
But in terms of a senior soccer international, the FAI don't recognise currently those games as being full internationals
because they were not there. Because England was not a member, and the home nations, they were not a member of the FIFA when the Congress was held in Paris. That's the moment where the FIFA decided they can come back. And before they went back to FIFA, the home nations, they said we only want to return to the FIFA if the rules of the board, the IFAB, the International Football Association Board, if they are still recognized by the FIFA, and the FIFA is not allowed to change the football rules without permission of the home nations, which is still the situation right now. If you want to change the league, how do you say the rules of football?
Yeah.
For example, we want to play with 12 people instead of 11, or we want to change offside. It is not a decision of the FIFA; it's a decision of the board.
Yeah, IFAB,
IFAB, yes, IFAB, yes, which is the board. And still, you have to have 75% of the votes to change, and FIFA only have 25% of the votes. No, 20.
Yeah.
So the FIFA is not. They cannot change. Not 25. They cannot change the rules only by FIFA. They need at least 2 home nations to support if they want to change the global football rules, and that is going back to 1924. I just found out today, where the FIFA decided, okay, we accept the home nations coming back to FIFA, and we accept also the authority of the board. They will be the master of the rules and not the FIFA, which is still 100 years later exactly the same situation. And that's, I think, why the FA is not recognizing the 1924 Olympics, because they were not there. But Ireland was, and the Netherlands they were, and Uruguay was, and the FIFA was organizing it. It was the most important football tournament because there was no World Cup in 1924. There was no European Championships in 1924. So I don't care what the FA say. They are not writing history. It's they are also a part of writing history, but that's one of the reasons why I think it's so important to have independent research of history of sports, which is not connected to official organizations like the IOC or the FA or FIFA or whatever, but cooperating. I don't want the EUC to tell me what's history. That's my responsibility to have a discussion about it. So that's what I would suggest you in Ireland. Don't listen to the FA. And it's your history. It's not their history.
Absolutely.
Yeah, there'd be no sympathy to that point of view, actually, in Ireland about the FA.
It's your birth. It's not the father or the mother who says when you have been born.
Thank you for
the baby
that.
who was born.
Well, listen, that's been really interesting, and thanks so much for taking the time to talk to us.
Well, that's great. And next week we move on to a game between Ireland and Estonia, but actually is still played in Paris. It's kind of a game between 2 defeated nations, but we'll talk more about that in our next episode of
Take each game, let's merit, sir.